Hi, and welcome to Chapter 14 on Leadership. This is a very popular chapter, and it should be. Remember that as business majors, we have an entire class dedicated to leadership. Being a leader, being a strong leader, is a very good commodity to have as a business student. If you think about the difference between a manager and a leader, and we'll talk about that, businesses are interested in leaders. Leaders can inspire others. Leaders can motivate others. Managers just manage. Think about whether or not you have natural leadership capabilities or tendencies, whether it's team sport, whether it's group projects. That's a good start, and then just keep nurturing and growing that as you go. If you're more of an introvert, don't worry. The chapter also talks about CEOs that are introverted. Most CEOs are extrovert, but a lot of great leaders are introvert and have their own qualities as well. Before I get into the whole table of content, I wanted to kind of highlight Tony Hsieh. We just lost him recently to a house fire, and as you know in this class, I talk about Zappos a lot. I talk about Tony Hsieh a lot. I always recommend his book, Delivering Happiness. He was just such an interesting character. And he's a great loss in the business world and in the world. I think he's the kind of leader, servant leader that we'll talk about. And he's the kind of servant leader that we need more of. Way too young to be lost there. So I wanted to start with one of his quotes: "The best leaders are servant leaders. They serve those they lead." And we'll continue to infuse classes with content from Tony Hsieh. Another one that I've always kind of liked is not in the book, and this is from Jack Welch. He wrote a biography a while back, straight from the gut, when he had just retired from General Electric. So he's a former CEO of GE. I know we've talked about him in this class. And one of the he was asked before to define leadership. What is a leader? And he had this little thing that he had created called the 4 E's and a P, and I always thought it was really cool. And he said the 4 E's are first energy. That the candidate, the employee, the person needs to have a tremendous amount of energy. Then he said having energy in itself is not enough. You have to be able to transfer that energy to others, your peers, your team, subordinates, etc. And so you have to be able to energize others. And then the third thing is execution, to get things done, to be extremely effective, action-oriented, get results. Last one is edge. To have that edge is very hard to define other than the will to win. Just really just something that gets you to stand apart from others, right? And all those E's are wrapped in passion. At the job interview, you should be on the edge of your seat with passion. You should really lean forward. You should be engaged. All of that stuff shows. So the 4 E's wrapped in a P was Jack Welch's definition of leadership. Again, it's not in the book. I wanted to add that because I always thought it was a cool way to start the discussion on leadership. Your author is a big fan of, I think, Ken Blanchard, we'll talk about a little bit as well, who's another pioneer of leadership. Let's go straight to the learning outcomes. So we'll talk about what leadership is, who leaders are, and what effective leaders do. Fiedler's contingency theory. Fiedler's going to pop up several times in management classes. Describe how path goal theory works. Explain normative decision theory. How visionaries, charismatic or transformational leadership helps leader achieve strategic leadership. So let's get right to leaders versus managers. And by the way, again, we're on page 306, 307. So, always a good idea as you listen to the lectures to have your book handy and follow along. And so in terms of the difference between a leader and a leader, they focus on the big picture. Think of that, the vision, the mission, the goals, the objective, the big picture. The managers tend to be more, feet on the ground, productivity, efficiency. A leader encourages creativity and risk-taking. And the manager they usually want the status quo. They're more short-term oriented, and they're more concerned with the means, whereas the leaders are concerned with the ends and have a long-term perspective. It's good to have a leadership team where you have both. Typically, the CEO, the lead executive is quite the visionary, is the leader that kind of looks out into the future. But you do have a right-hand person who tends to be more of the operational person that just makes sure that they get the day-to-day, month-to-month, year-to-year done. In terms of trait theories, there's some controversy over some of the stuff with trait theory. So we're on page 308. Your author, covers some of the stuff about, again, leadership traits. For example, trait theory holds that leaders are taller, more confident, greater physical stamina than non-leaders. And some of the stuff, it's there, it's listed. But again, you don't have to be tall to be an amazing leader. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble. So just take all that stuff with a grain of salt. But in terms of the trait leaders, they have similar sets of trait characteristics. I wouldn't get hung up on the physiological stuff that's just kind of out there a little bit. Only the fact, if you just want to look at the fact that, yes, some studies show that people tend to, for whatever reason, boards like tall people. But also, not too long ago, boards tend to prefer tall white men. So things are changing, thank goodness. Effective leaders possess a similar set of traits and characteristics. The traits are the stable characteristics, abilities, psychological motives, consistent patterns or behavior. And so that's, leaders differ from non-leaders based on these. Now, these are the traits that are not physiological, thank God. And so drive, they have more drive, they have more gumption, the desire to lead, very competitive. Honesty and integrity is another trait. If you don't have that, or if you're going about things the wrong way, very soon you lose your people. That's why it's so important to always have that integrity. Self-confidence, it takes a lot of self-confidence to lead. Emotional stability is huge. They talk about different kinds of leaders out there who think that they're entitled to abuse their staff. There's no room for that. Cognitive ability and knowledge of the business is another one. Let's see. By the way, again, having said that, some great leaders out there are people who came from outside their industry. Lou Gerstner, we talked about him before, who was one of the CEOs of IBM, who turned IBM around, wrote a book about it. What fascinating guy, was not of the computer industry. He was first in American Express, and after that with Nabisco, prior to going with IBM. So knowledge of the business is a broad brush, and often what that means is having an understanding of the industry is enough. Leadership behavior, initiating structure. So, having great vision is one thing. To talk about the great goals you have for the company is one thing. But it's also really important to make sure that you let people know how things are going to work, where they start, what they do, etc. So that's called initiating structure. Degree to which a leader structure the role of their followers by how they set goals. And there's the proximal and the distal goals. I'm sure you remember that from previous chapters. Giving directions, setting deadlines, assigning tasks. So all of these things, when you have a leader who just kind of very vague, it can be very frustrating and also set everybody up for failure. A leader's ability to initiate structure affects subordinates' job performance. Continuing with the leadership behavior, consideration is another one, extent to which a leader is friendly, approachable, and supportive and shows concern for employees. You've heard a lot about open door policies. Some leaders, some bosses, their desk is amidst the desks or cubicles even of their subordinates. Affect subordinates' job satisfaction. The Blake-Moulton leadership grid is a good way for us to kind of get into that. And so for that, we're on page 311, moving on to page 312. He used 2 leadership behavior, concern for people, that is consideration, and concern for production, that's initiating structures, to categorize 5 leadership styles. Both behaviors are rated on a 9-point scale, with 1 representing low and 9 representing high. So you can see the 2 9s right there. And in this particular case, a high or 9-9 leadership style is best. So in this case, team management, right? Work accomplished is from committee people, interdependence through common stake, etc. Of course, the worst is going to be the 1-1, impoverished management, exertion of minimum effort to get required work done is appropriate to sustain membership. And then it walks you through, the other sides. What's interesting about this, about these models, 50 years of research indicate that there isn't one best leadership style, which is why I tend to kind of go over this area rather quickly. The best leadership style depends on the situation. In other words, no one leadership behavior by itself and no one combination of leadership behavior works well across all situations and employees. And so that take all that with a grain of salt. All right, now we're getting into the situational approach. Having said just that, it's not just your style, and we do have an innate style perhaps as leaders based on our personality and how we're born. But this is about getting into matching your style to a situation. And so the situational approach to leadership assumes that the effectiveness of any leadership style depends on the situation. So here we're getting into Fiedler's contingency theory, which dictates that performance can be maximized by matching leaders to the situation that best fit their leadership style. I don't know how good of an example this is, but I'll use it anyway. Counselors. These are the people who make it happen at Chaffee College. I've been there 20 years now, and it's been just amazing to see how many lives have been transformed by just having met with a counselor who just on the right day with the right amount of enthusiasm and pushing convinced the student to take a path that paid dividends for the rest of their lives with the major, the university, etc. And I always think about students and how picking the right counselor is important based on the need of each student. There's the student who's extremely driven, extremely independent, and just wants to know, am I doing everything right? Is this the right ed plan? And I've got it. I don't need you to motivate me. I'm already self-motivated. And there might be one counselor that's just perfect for that student. On the other hand, there's another counselor might be more nurturing that will help students that are more at risk. And by the way, a lot of our students are very much at risk. When you're the only person in your family you go to college, you're more at risk. Foster youth students are at risk. We have a whole list of students who are at risk, and they require a different approach. And yes, sometimes you need that talk from someone who will tell you they've been there, because maybe you can't talk to your family members because they haven't been there. And so I always think about that situational approach to leadership based on the needs of students and how a counselor has to wear so many hats based on the need of a student. So here's a cool little clip about this person here who got a job at Southwest Airlines and explains in her interview she had described something she did with her previous job to motivate her employees.
These are the leadership qualities that got me my job at Southwest Airlines. So I was interviewing for a Scrum Master position, which basically is a servant leader for a technology team. So I told them about my previous experience, how I had a team, they had a really hard goal, and they were really discouraged. They weren't sure if they were going to make it. And I told them that if they hit this really ambitious goal, that I would come in a kangaroo suit, and I would hop around all day. I would go to meetings in the kangaroo suit if that's what it took to make them laugh and to motivate them. And they hit the goal, And so I did. I came in a kangaroo suit and I hopped around all day and got my cardio in, which I guess was good. So a bad leader is someone who doesn't care about other people and puts their own ego first. And telling these stories, even though maybe my story was a little bit embarrassing, they absolutely showed my leadership qualities, that I'm there for my teams. And to this day, my boss remembers that story, and he said that those qualities were a huge reason why I got my job.
There we go. And so I thought, this was such a fun example. Again, leaders who are down to earth, who don't take themselves too seriously and connect, are the ones that people really tend to also really be enthusiastic about going out of their way for. Okay, getting into Fiedler's contingency theory. And so now what we're doing here is we're looking into his assumptions, right? The assumptions of that contingency theory is that leaders are effective when their work group perform well. Leaders are unable to change their leadership style is another assumption. You are, however you are. And so, he refers to leadership style. When he refers to that, he means the way that leaders generally behave toward their followers, right? So again, it's kind of a fixed thing. We're on page 313, right? And so we come up with this LPC scale, right? The least preferred coworker scale. Here, there's a questionnaire that's used to measure leadership style, and with the scores kind of defining the style. So it shows you here based on your style, based on your score, what your style is. Once you have that, you apply that to the situation, right? And so in this case, the situational favorableness, degree to which a particular situation either permits or denies a leader the chance to influence the behavior of a group member. Factors that determine this are the leader-member relations, how well followers respect, trust, and like their leaders, the task structure, the degree to which the requirement of a subordinate's tasks are clearly specified. Then you're looking into position power. And so that's the degree to which leaders are able to hire, fire, reward, and punish workers. Now we're on page 315. What's interesting about this is that Fiedler found that the performance of relationship and task-oriented leaders followed a pattern. And this pattern is right here. What he found was when you look at in this case, these situations here, in terms of the situation being favorable all the way to unfavorable, in terms of measuring things with leader-member relations, task structures, position power, the three things we just talked about. Favorable is everything is peachy right there. And so for those, group performance, when you look at task-oriented leaders, they actually do pretty well. And the relationship-oriented leaders are kind of low, right? Why? Well, because again, things are kind of running pretty smoothly. Moderately favorable, then you're going into an increase here with the good and poor at the leader-member relations. When that's high, you can see that now the relationship-oriented leaders are the ones that are going to be needed here. Otherwise, the task-oriented leaders again are fine with when we're over here. And then back on top over here, basically what you're identifying here is again the pattern that he had talked about between the two types of leaders. All right, moving along to Hersey and Blanchard's situational theories. These theories state that the leaders need to adjust their leadership style to match followers' readiness. And performance readiness is the ability and willingness to take responsibility for directing one's behavior at work. The components of readiness are job readiness and psychological readiness. They combined the two to produce 4 different types of readiness. So to make it easy, I'll just kind of walk you through right here. So you have right there R1 through R4, and here they are at the bottom, right? And so it's showing you in terms of the model the supportive behavior, low to high, and that's the relationship behavior, and the task behavior, low to high. And for each behavior, you get to see which of the performance readiness is going to fit best for the behavior. And so delegating, in this particular case, actually let's start with R1. R1 over here for low represents insecure people who are neither willing nor able to take responsibility for guiding their own work. So over here, telling. That's going to be the situational leadership model, to just tell them what to do. And then for R2, you're looking at people who are confident and are willing, but not able to take responsibility for guiding their own work. So now you have to convince them. That's the selling. And so R3 represents people who are insecure and are able, but they're not willing to take responsibility for guiding their work. And so for R3, that's participating over here. And of course, R4, people who are confident and willing and able to take responsibility for guiding their own work. Delegating should be fine here. You get the idea. So that's the model here for that. So again, and that model is going to go from page 316 to 318 to walk you through. The theory doesn't seem to work well. Again, that's why I'm letting you this kind of go through, but I want to kind of also make sure that I let you know what the conclusion is here. So we're on page 318, end of that area, reading from your author here. So let's see. The theory doesn't seem to work well except at lower levels, where telling style is recommended for people who are insecure and neither willing nor able to take responsibility for guiding their own work. Otherwise, not so much. All right, the path goal theory. Leaders can increase subordinate satisfaction and performance by clarifying and clearing the path to goals. They can also increase the number and kinds of rewards available for path attainment. And so in this particular case, the conditions for path clarification, path clearing, and rewards are that the leader behavior must be a source of immediate or future satisfaction for followers. A little bit of psychology there. Leader behavior must offer something unique and valuable to followers while providing the coaching, guidance, support, reward necessary. And so over here, again, you can see each category: the leadership style, subordinate contingencies, environmental contingency, and outcome. So the leadership style leads to the outcome, and the subordinate contingencies and environmental contingencies are going to support the effort, right? And all of that is going to, hopefully, the outcome will be subordinate satisfaction and subordinate performance. And so the leadership style could be directive, supportive, participative, achievement-oriented. And in terms of the subordinate contingencies, we're looking at different areas here: perceived ability, locus of control, etc. So going into, again, I want you guys to kind of look at this on your own. Maybe I'll talk about the locus of control. The locus of control has to do with, it's a personality measure that indicates the extent to which people believe that they have control over what happens to them in life. So you have internal or external locus of control. If you have internal control, locus of control, you believe that whatever happens to you, whether good or bad, is the outcome of your choices. But externals believe that it's just basically beyond their control. It's never their fault. It's always somebody else's fault. And so maybe some people like that. They can't get a break. It's never their fault. And so that's external locus of control. Anyway, so all of that to kind of lead to that idea that with the right mix of the path goal theory, you'll get the desired outcome. Again, when to use directive, supportive, participative, etc. So for unstructured tasks, that's the directive leadership. The supportive leadership would be the following: participative for the following, and achievement for the following. I'm not just going to let you guys look at that on your own. Now moving on to the normative decision theory. When I was in college, we just called it the Vroom-Yetton-Jago model. I know it's a mouthful, but if I keep referring to that, that's because that's how I learned it back in the dark ages. And so normative theory, decision theory, helps leaders determine an appropriate amount of employee participation when making decisions. This one I really like personally, and I think it's one that can be very useful for some of you out there in leadership roles when you need to kind of decide to what extent you want to involve your subordinates in decision making, if at all. And so you have decision styles, the autocratic, consultative, and group decision. And we'll go through each of them in a pretty straightforward way. I'll walk you through. In this case, the right degree of employee participation improves quality decision, extent to which employees accept and are committed to decision. Right now with this whole COVID adjustments, a lot of companies are having a really tough time selling change to their employees. And sometimes even finding out to what extent you need to engage or involve your subordinate is key. And so this it's a decision tree is what it really is. So you state the problem at the very beginning, right? So QR is whatever the problem is, it's you stating the quality requirement is what QR is. How important is the technical quality of this decision could be the question. And so by the way, if you want to follow this, it's on page 325. There's a really cool little thing from your author that kind of walks you through. Well, actually, it's not from your author. It's from Vroom-Jago. It's from the original one from 1973. And so anyway, when if the answer is yes, it's high, right? Then we're going to go to this area right there, CR, commitment requirement. The question is, how important is subordinate commitment to this decision? And here we're going to say, yes, it's high. We need the commitment. All right, let's go to leaders' information. Do you have sufficient information to make a high quality decision? And let's say that the answer is yes. So now I'm going up here to CP, commitment probability. If you were to make the decision by yourself, is it reasonably certain that your subordinate would be committed to the decision? In this case, notice we're going to say no. And so now we're getting into GC, goal congruence. Do subordinates share the organizational goal to be attained in solving the problem? In this case, the answer is no. So I'm defaulting here to C2 or CLL. So let's see what that's all about. I put the big arrow here. That's where we landed, right? Notice, by the way, this is the continuum from AI. Leader solve the problem, make the decision. So if we had landed here, the leader would use the information available at the time, solve the problem, make the decision, doesn't involve anybody else. So that's like really on the far left. On the far right, leader shares the problem with the employees of group. Together, the leader, employees generate, evaluate alternative, try to reach some kind of solution. Leader acts as facilitator, etc. Basically, the leader is willing to accept and implement any solution that has the support of the entire group. That is the most democratic solution over here, full-on autocratic over here. We landed over here. The leader shares the problem with the employees as a group, obtains their ideas and suggestions, and then makes the decision, which may or may not reflect their input. That's where we landed. Again, I hope you'll see that this is a very useful tool. Going back to the beginning, right? So QR, CR, LI, and all that other stuff. What you have here are the rules, right? So the quality rules, that's the QR, LI, walking you through all the way down, right? So that's Exhibit 14.8 on your text. I know there's a lot going on here. I think almost for me, the way I look at the Vroom-Yetton-Jago model is almost as a reference guide for leaders sometimes, where maybe they're not sure how to proceed, and it's just a nice little way of this kind of going through the motion and then decide in the end if you agree with the outcome. Leadership. All right, visionary leadership. We talked about this in other chapters when we talked about the skills of upper, middle, or line management, and what skills are going to be most desired or more useful at each level. And at the very, very, very top, of course, visionary, the big picture skill is one of the skills. It's the number one skills, if you will, at the very top level, at the CEO. Again, I always use the example of IBM. When Lou Gerstner was hired to IBM at the time, the giant that it was, but in big trouble, it was just flailing. It was no longer the big computer juggernaut that it was once. And they hired this guy who just came out of Nabisco. And some people were just shocked, like, what? This guy who came out of Nabisco is going to save the world's biggest computer company? And it wasn't about his lack of knowledge of the computer industry that kept him from being hired. What got him hired was his vision, the skill that he had as a great visionary, and again, turning IBM around. So visionary leadership creates a positive image of the future that motivates members, provides direction for future planning and goal setting. It goes back to what we had talked about before, chapter on planning and strategy, upper middle line management, and when we talk about at the very bottom line management, operational plan supports tactical plan, middle management supports strategic plan, upper management, all aligned to the mission and vision, right? The types are charismatic leadership and transformational leadership. So let's get right into it. You have the ethical charismatic and the unethical. The ethical charismatic provide developmental opportunities for followers, recognize others' contribution, open to positive and negative feedback, and have moral standards. Basically, unethical are almost the opposite. Often, the example that's used in the computer industry is with two women who couldn't be just more opposite of each other. On the one hand, you had Carly Fiorina, who was a CEO of Hewlett-Packard at one time and was essentially fired from Hewlett-Packard and often used as an unethical charismatic leader. She divided the company, basically. She went against the board. She forced the company into a vote over a decision to buy Compaq. It was just a horrible telenovela. If it hadn't been already done, maybe it would have been called La Bruja. Anyway, and so that's Carly Fiorina. The other one is Xerox, Anne Mulcahy, who was exactly the opposite. She was, in fact, some people said more of an introvert, whereas Mulcahy was very much an extrovert and a fantastic, ethical, charismatic leader. People just worshipped her at Xerox, and she turned the company around. She, instead of taking credit for major advancements with the company, she always gave credit to her people. She always passed the credit to her teams, to her employees. They got the credit. When something went wrong, she took the blame. You can imagine complete opposite with Carly Fiorina. She took the credit but passed on the blame. So you'll see a lot of business books out there with those two examples. Transformational leadership generates awareness and acceptance of a group's purpose and mission, gets employees to see beyond their own needs and self-interest. The components are charismatic leadership or idealized influence. There's inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation as well. Lastly, the individualized consideration is another big factor. And then you have the transactional leadership, just like it sounds, based on exchange process. Followers are rewarded for good performance or punished for poor performance. It relies heavily on discipline or threats to bring performance up to standards. In all sincerity, I quoted Jack Welch earlier. A lot of people will tell you he was a transactional leader because he came up with some really hardcore rules at GE while he was in charge. One of them was the 2070-10. some people called it the rank and yank, where the bottom 10%, listen to this, the bottom 10% of the company was fired every single year. Bottom 10%. Top 20% got rewarded, and the middle 70 just kept your job and good enough. All right, well, that concludes that chapter on leadership. As always, make sure you get your key terms out of the way. We covered everything. This book has a lot going on in terms of leadership, so I would make sure that you, again, as always, follow along with your book, get everything out of the way, and that concludes chapter 14 on leadership.